So the other option is you basically have this list of options, everything from verbal warning up to being fired. And the disciplinary decision maker, the committee, looks at the circumstances of the case and decides where on that spectrum does this case fit? What is appropriate for this case? We have serious behavior, but we have some mitigating circumstances, or we have a person that is our expert or the only person who knows how to do this essential business function. So we don't want to fire them yet, but what can we do that's still serious? Is there a way to try to handle this? What's the lowest level we can handle this at appropriately? All of these things, this is part of the discussion. This is part of why that committee model can be so effective, because you can have this discussion. They can make the decision based on the behavior and the circumstances surrounding the behavior. But they have to be careful to be consistent. That's one reason why you should at least have some permanent members if you're doing the committee model. They need to know what they did last time. You need people who are consistently making decisions, and as they see the case, more and more cases, they will say, oh yeah, based on what we've done, this falls in this area of our spectrum. You never want to make the decision solely based on the offender status or position. You do have to look at the business side of it, but you don't want to. Your discussion shouldn't be, okay, so this guy's been with us for 15 years and is a leader. He's one of our managers. So what can we get away with? Or I like this person. So you don't have to be the same. This allows you the flexibility to adapt to the situation specifically. So you're not giving the exact same punishment for the exact same misconduct every time, but it should be over time consistent, where people can look at it and see a consistency and can see patterns. And you have to be able to, if you are the decision maker, you have to be able to articulate your decision and why it was reasonable or necessary given that situation. So if someone comes to you later and says, why is this doesn't make sense to me? Why did you make this decision? You should be able to answer that question easily, because you've articulated that in your own mind or in writing of why you made the specific decision. In other words, you don't want to fire someone for stealing $40, but then retain your vice president for sexually assaulting a coworker. Right? It's going to be really hard to articulate the reasonableness of that decision. And what that looks like is you're protecting your vice president, but a normal employee isn't worth anything and you'll get rid of them for any reason. So the reasonableness test is just that. People should be able to look at your decisions and say, okay, not what I would have done, but makes sense. That's reasonable. Everyone involved in the decision-making process, whether it's one person or a committee, needs to have the authority to make the decision. They need to be granted that ability, that authority in the policy. You should never have your CEO calling your decision maker or your committee saying, hey, I need you to go easy on this person. You could get input from the CEO, and the CEO could say, this person invented this process that we use for our business, and right now this person is the only one who really understands it, so we will go under if you fire this person. Take that into consideration. That's okay. That's different than putting undue pressure or command influence to get the decision maker to go a certain way. You also need to protect that decision maker or makers from retaliation. They may make a decision that senior leaders, people above them, don't agree with and don't like. They can't be afraid that their career is going to stall if they make a decision that someone doesn't like. That causes them to make the decisions they think their leaders want instead of the decision that they believe is correct. So protect them in writing. You are sending, every time that you discipline someone, you are sending a message to your organization, to your community, to your members of your values, what you stand for. This entire process, we said this in the first lesson, this entire process is based on your values. This decision at the end reflects those values. Ultimately, this is where the rubber hits the road and you are saying, this is how acceptable we consider this, how serious we consider this misconduct based on our values. So if it is a senior leader where you have this difficult decision to make of what to do about this senior person, is someone who is engaging in misconduct, no matter if they're the face of your brand, is that the face that you want? Is that the person that you want leading your organization? And will your organization, can it survive without that person? But if you keep them, how long will it survive with a person who is engaging in that type of behavior? Your disciplinary decision makers are looking at all of these factors, but ultimately it boils down to you have a finding that this person engaged in conduct that you have already determined is unacceptable. It's in your policy. It is labeled as misconduct because based on your beliefs and your values, it is unacceptable behavior. And now you have a person, no matter who they are in your organization, who is engaged in behavior that you consider unacceptable. That's what you're dealing with. So I've talked about all of these other different factors that might come into the decision, but ultimately that's what you have to realize. Focus on the behavior, focus on what the person did. What is the appropriate discipline for the behavior? All the other mitigating stuff is something to consider and talk about, but ultimately your decision is what is the appropriate response to that behavior and what does that communicate about our values. I've heard many people say that as part of this decision making, they should ask the complainant or the victim, well, what do you want? What do you want to happen to this person? I've asked that question before as part of the investigation. There are times in an interview where that is a very telling question. You get a lot of information by asking that question. I don't ask it every time, and you probably shouldn't ask it every time, but it gives you some good information if you need it. So I've heard people say, well, shouldn't the complainant be part of this decision-making process? This happened to them. They should be able to decide what happens to the respondent. Well, first of all, this process isn't about vindication. This isn't a personal revenge process that the company has gone through for the complainant. This is an investigation into a violation of the business's policy. So the times that I've asked that question to victims, here's the issue. The most common responses by far are one of the following two. They either say, I just want him to get help. I'm not here. I don't want to get him in trouble. I just want him to get help. Okay, well, that's not what we're doing here. So that doesn't work. Or the other one is, I want his head on a stick displayed in the town square for everyone to see. I want to destroy this person's life. So usually it's one of these two extremes, neither of which is really appropriate for what we're talking about here, for your process. They're not trained in investigations. They're not trained in internal misconduct. They don't really understand what is appropriate and what is not. To them, they're very personally involved in it. This is something that happened to them. It's a very emotional time, emotional decision. It's not really appropriate for them to decide what should happen, because at this point, this is a business decision. They can decide their relationship with this person personally, what that looks like and what they're going to do there. They can take personal action against the person, but this is an administrative business investigation. That's what the victim impact statement is for. If they want to be involved in the disciplinary phase, they need to submit the impact statement. That's where you get their input. They shouldn't have any kind of decision-making authority or weight. They also have no idea how you've handled certain cases. They will have no idea how to be consistent, because this is a personal thing, something that happened to them. So asking the question in the investigation phase is appropriate, is fine. But in the disciplinary phase, you don't want them to think that they actually are a part of this decision-making process. Their role is to provide input to the decision maker, not be part of the decision-making. And these impact statements can be very powerful. They can be very impactful. They take an event that happened in a very specific 10-minute time frame and give it context to show you how that 10 minutes has absolutely changed this person's life. That allows you to understand that. You don't see that. The investigation is looking at those 10 minutes and kind of some of the surrounding timeframes when you're looking for evidence and evaluating evidence, but it doesn't show how it's impacted them over months, how it's changed their life. So this is very informative information. It's very valuable information, but it is simply a way to help the decision maker. It's not becoming part of the process.